Hello, I'm Mariana Cordier. Welcome to Montgomery Weekend Review. The provisions of clean, dependable water to all persons in the world has been one of Rotary International's goals for some time. Greg Wims, a member of Rotary, will tell us about a project in Africa that was supported by 2 local clubs. Recently, Montgomery County lost one of its 2 local newspapers. Linna Barnes, associate producer of this show, is here to discuss the importance of local news to the residents of our county. Montgomery Hospice offers its clients many services beyond the basic expected care that they are known for. Rabbi Gary Fink is here to tell us about spiritual care, what it is, and how it can help. Most people have heard about the importance of the honeybee to agriculture in our county and understand that bees have been in trouble for a while. Dr. Barry Thompson, who has cared for his own hives and has done some research about the problem, will offer some hopeful words about the essential honeybee. Greg, I keep doing that. Thank you for being here today and to talk to us about the importance of clean water.
Well, glad to be here. And, in Montgomery County in particular, we take clean water for granted. We brush our teeth, we run the water. But in some parts of the world, and particularly in Kenya, there was a school with 800 girls. It was a girls' school, and it was a boarding school. And literally, about 40% of those children every week would get sick from drinking dirty water that they were getting from a river. So the Bethesda Chevy Chase Rotary Club and the North Bethesda Rotary Club, we both put monies together. We both have foundations, and we built what we call a water harvesting system and put in 3 huge 10,000 liter tanks. So it's safe to say now that the girls have clean drinking water and that the enrollment has increased from 800 to 1,000.
That's great.
But just that one little thing of coming together, bringing clean water, made a difference.
And that's a Rotary goal, isn't it?
It is. Rotary has 6 main areas that we work with, dealing with education, economics, health. Water, clean and safe water is one of those. We also, and as you talk about clean and safe water, in another Rotary Club here in Montgomery County, they also have a project where they're actually digging a well, but in another part of the country.
And isn't there a phone number for those interested about these projects that they could call?
You could call me at 301-212-4141. And if you have any questions on how to get involved or how to donate even to Rotary. I wore my little pin today. You may not be able to see it, but it says End Polio Now. Because some of the things that all the Rotary Clubs do, and particularly our 2 Rotary Clubs in Bethesda that I'm talking about, we actually donate money to a fund to end polio. That's another one of our very, very important initiatives.
How close are we to ending polio?
Well, I was just talking earlier to Linna. After many, many years of the world having this terrible disease, we think in about 1 year polio will be eradicated. And the World Health Organization has credited Rotary clubs all over the world for being out front and eliminating polio.
It's so important for things like this, to really have somebody behind it, pushing it, because we think in this country, it really, the 60s was when the polio vaccinations became possible, and it really ended it here, but not the rest of the world, because people just didn't get those vaccinations.
Right. Can you imagine over the last 40 years? There are little kids being born, and even adults that get polio. But the good news is probably within the next 7 to 12 months, it will be gone. And so we say thank God to that. And we thank all those who have donated. And again, if those, because we're still collecting funds, my number is on the screen. You can donate right to the Rotary directly.
So you don't have to be a member of Rotary to donate to Rotary?
You don't have to be a member.
Greg, are you pleased to see so many environmental as well as health issues becoming embraced by the spiritual communities? More and more churches, synagogues, mosques, temples are seeing those issues as part of a broad spiritual agenda now, more and more.
Right, we're seeing that, and I would say, because we're talking pretty much, from my talk about Rotary, we're partnering, and we're partnering with a lot of the faith community, all faiths, because Rotary is worldwide. So no matter what the faith is, we work together, especially as it comes to clean water, to ending polio, and also education. So you're absolutely right. We're working with the faith community and the spiritual leaders.
And collaboration really leverages what any one organization can do. obviously, duplicative efforts are not really the types of things that get the biggest bang for the buck. The collaborative efforts are.
Now, when you think about just the water issue, if you're in a small community and you're digging 2 wells, I mean, that's not really that's not necessary, but if you have organizations that can combine together, then you have 2 communities that get that benefit, not just, becomes much more widespread.
Absolutely. And I did want to add one other thing. You see too on my shirt, I have bold concepts, and that's actually where I work. But the reason I mentioned that, the owner of the company gave a $1,000 donation when we were doing our project with the North Bethesda and the Bethesda Chevy Chase Club, just to add to that so that we would have the project to be successful and go on.
And there's so many areas in the world that are struggling with clean water.
Yes.
That we just assume, you know, either they have limited access to water because of the arid environment in many places in Africa. Which countries are you really focused on?
Well, we focus all over, but in the particular Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and North Bethesda, we've been working in Kenya and in a small area. We're trying to make a difference. There's about 12,000 residents, and so we've been focusing our attention there. And so it's worked. The kids are no longer getting sick. And one last thing, the school, they were ranked maybe 10th in the nation of Kenya. Last year they got the #1 ranking, and I think part of that the kids are drinking clean water, not getting sick. And they went to meet the president. The principal went to meet the president of the country and got a certificate for being the #1 school in Kenya.
That's fantastic. So if anyone wants to donate, they just call, or is there a website?
The number's on the screen. Yes.
Okay. All right. And can you give it to me again?
Yes, 301-212-4141.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Linna, thank you for being on the show, even though you're the producer.
I'm so glad to be here.
But what's happening with our local newspapers?
Well, I don't know if people have heard, because this is something, if you don't get it delivered to your door, you might not even notice that it's gone. But the Montgomery County Gazette and also the Prince George's County Gazette, which were published by the Post, have both been closed down. So they are no longer. The middle of June was the last issues that were printed. So,
and that's such a shame, because they had so much of the local news, the high school sports, notices,
all of that. When you think about some place like Montgomery County, which is attached to a very large urban area, is part of a large urban area that's served by the Washington Post, but the Post really can't cover all this local news in depth, as often happens in an area that is a smaller newspaper area. And so the Gazette really provided a service. It's now going to be that just the Montgomery Sentinel will be the only local paper that's left. From a time when there were, well, I can think of there was the Almanac, which might still be published, but the Sentinel, the Journal, the Montgomery Journal was a paper that ended about 10 years ago, or even a little bit more. But it's just, it's part of the whole moving away from print journalism that we see across the country, not the county. But this is just one more aspect of it, that these small local journals and newspapers are disappearing.
Is there anything to compensate for that, perhaps online?
Well, you're starting to get more online. There's Bethesda Now, which is a website. Right. There are other things like this. I'm not sure what the profit picture for these, the economic outlook for these websites, because they haven't come up with a really good way to produce the information.
But that's confusing, because I remember reading, I would read the Gazette, and I noticed they had so many ads, so much advertising, that I would have thought that was the Gazette the issue money, or was it?
It was the money. It was the Post has ended all of theirs. They managed in Fairfax, and the Virginia Gazettes managed to be sold to someone else, to another publisher. But no one was willing to purchase the Prince George's County Gazette or the Montgomery Gazette. So those just ended.
I just want to say that, first, I'm very happy that the Sentinel will still be here to read, because there's some, like I say, seniors or whatever, they really don't know social media as well as maybe some of the younger folks, and the newspaper is the one thing that they would get their news from, especially local Montgomery County news. And I'm just so sad that we just have basically one newspaper now for local
And
news.
also, Greg, a lot of the work of Montgomery Hospice deals with community education, with educating folks about the resources that they can rely on and draw upon when they face life-limiting illness, serious illness, end-of-life care, and so we have to work and are trying to work that much harder without the support of a local newspaper.
And I think you're right about that. There are lots of small local organizations which really depended on the Gazette to get stories out, whether it's stories about what their services are, or perhaps a fundraising activity or something like that. And that's just not there. I know that I'm the president of the League of Women Voters, and we always counted on the Gazette to monthly put in notices of meetings that we have where on different topics, like bees.
And
that is going to be one of the topics.
And the Post just cannot respond in the same fashion to those kind of local issues. The posting of notices and the rest of the business is much, much more limited.
Exactly.
is
You
it
can
not?
have a small calendar, but it's really, it can't have as many county activities because you've got, what, 6 counties,
Right.
7 counties, whatever it is in the district. It's just different. But it'll be interesting to see if the online resources can somehow fill this gap. I just don't see where the money comes from to do it. If you think of the Gazette, they had, I think, something like 10 sports writers. So how can you support 10 sports writers?
Is the business model different for the Sentinel? I have to admit I'm ignorant of their financial basis.
You know what? I don't know what their financial plan is to keep them going. I think, if you're the only player in the marketplace, you can manage to sustain yourself. But I don't know that many details.
I know that I would always gravitate towards the Gazette first and not necessarily the Sentinel, and now I'm sure that I'm going to gravitate towards the Sentinel.
I think the
more
Sentinel
so because it's the only thing left.
One of the classified ads and the legal ads, I don't know if those might well go to the Sentinel. You have to publish legal notices.
Right.
The Gazette had that. That's a source of income.
Sure.
Which
Yeah.
there have been frequent bills in the legislature to change it, but
Okay, well, that's the last word. And so now we're going to take a break. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back. Rabbi Gary Fink, Montgomery Hospice. What is it that you do in the spiritual care of your patients or your members at the hospice, your clients?
Mariana, when a person or a family encounters serious, life-threatening, life-limiting illness or approach the end of life, it's like a world turned upside down. And so often folks just don't know where to turn. They don't know what the next step should be. Montgomery Hospice is a full-service hospice organization, the largest in Montgomery County and the first and oldest, providing not only spiritual care, but nursing care, social work care, complementary therapies like massage and aromatherapy, and a very robust and supportive bereavement program after the unfortunate loss of a loved one. But spiritual care is very important, more than most people think, because spiritual care is not just about religion. It might include religion, but it can provide support for everyone. Spirituality is really about meaning and connection. And whatever provides someone's life with meaning and connection, that's spiritual. So for some, it's a relationship with God, but for others, it may be a relationship with a husband, a wife, a child, family that may be half the world away, or even a loving pet, or nature. All of that is spiritual. It may be religious, but it might not be. And we hospice chaplains, although having specific backgrounds, my background is as a rabbi, but my training as a hospice chaplain involves supporting everyone to the extent that I can, religiously or heart-to-heart, person-to-person, in a general spiritual way.
And so in the hospice, not everyone that you care for or are having interaction with is actually at a facility. Is that correct? You actually
That's
go to
exactly
people's
right.
homes?
We do have Casey House. We're the only hospice in Montgomery County that has our own inpatient facility. So about 5% of our patients, when they're in trouble and they're in pain that can't be controlled or have other symptoms, can rush to our hospice ER, which is Casey House. Not a hospital, but more like a home setting in which we can provide intensive 24-hour nursing care. But 95% of the folks we serve reside in their own homes or in facilities, and we travel to them. We make house calls. Our nurses, social workers, chaplains, massage therapists, and over 300 volunteers, we come to you when you need help. Because who wants to go to a doctor's office, or who wants to try and take a very sick relative somewhere else when the hospice services can come to you? It's a great benefit.
I think that's the most important part of hospice. I've always found it, that you really do go to where the client, the patient is. Because when my sister was ill and dying, it was so important to have her to remain at home where she was comfortable and, you know, felt that she really had her support people around her, and she didn't have to go to a nursing home or anything at those last days of her life.
Staying at home and staying in charge to the degree that you can of your own care is so important, because when life is happening around you and so many things are out of our hands, to be able to exert some control is so very, very important. You know, Linna, people often ask, don't the hospice workers and service people get depressed, and isn't it difficult work? And every one of my colleagues that I speak to all feel that, yes, it might be sad, but it's rarely depressing because it's so gratifying.
And there's a phone number for Montgomery Hospice, is that correct?
That's right, 301-921-4400, and anyone can call that number 24 hours a day. We have nurses standing by at all times for any emergencies or even questions. And there's no such thing as a silly question.
And you know, I'm glad you brought it up, because 4 years ago, my aunt was one of those who, she was getting ill.
I see.
And it was hospice that came in to her home to help her, and she looked forward to that. It brought joy to her heart. But also, I went a couple times to, you know, to see what the volunteers, as she called it, were doing. And you're right, they weren't depressed, they were uplifting. It was just a great joy to see them there helping my aunt. And to the very end, they came. So I saw firsthand the good work that you do.
And in a home setting, don't you have the ability too then to support other family members, not just the patient at that stage, such that the interaction amongst family members must be enhanced in some fashion?
Barry, that's exactly right. The entire family is our focus of care, because everyone is going through a crisis of a very personal and a very different kind.
And that's the last word on that. And thank you for doing this kind of work, because it's so important for all of us when we reach that point in our lives where we have bereavement issues. And so thank you. Dr. Thompson, tell me about these honeybees. Are we in trouble, or is there hope?
Well, there's both trouble and hope.
Okay.
Most of our listeners will be reminded that roughly a third of everything that we eat is pollinated by insects, and about 80% of that by honeybees. So honeybees are important. We do know that across the world, honeybees and other pollinators are in decline. And there have been a variety of efforts to turn back that tide. There are multiple causes, obviously, and much of the research is yet to be done. But we just celebrated Pollinator Week nationwide, all 50 states, and the president in June of 2014 set about a call for a strategy for the protection of pollinators, set up a task force, and that task force produced a plan in June of this year, just in time for Pollinator Week, that laid out how to approach that situation. There are three main goals: the education of the public, the expansion of the research, and the ability to open or enhance the access to public lands or private lands through a governmental private partnership. In other words, the Forestry Service of the United States Department of Agriculture is being encouraged to allow beekeepers to move colonies of managed bees into areas that have been closed to pollinators.
So there's a difference, though, between a honeybee and a wasp, right? For those of us who are not experts.
Wasps are insects also, but wasps do not pollinate because they eat meat instead of pollen as their protein.
Okay.
And they don't produce honey because they don't live over the winter and therefore don't need winter reserves. So wasps are important in nature for the consumption of pests in the garden like worms or caterpillars, that sort of situation, but not as pollinators in the usual sense, and certainly not as bumblebees, native bees, and honeybees are.
So, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying, Dr. Jones, what can we do as individuals to help to bring back the bees that we need so much to pollinate?
Well, there are several things that come to mind. First of all, the judicious use of pesticides. We're not saying that pesticides should be eliminated completely. We recognize that there might be a 20 or 25% drop in the productivity of a farmer's crops if no pesticides were used. But the proper application and adherence to the label, not providing contamination of flowers when the pollinators are visiting them, is one very important thing. There's also just been announced a 1 million pollinator garden initiative in which any of the 4 of you can sign up, have a commitment that you're going to do things in your yard that are going to make it more attractive to the pollinators, the bats, the butterflies, the beetles, the birds, and the bees.
But I certainly have noticed in my garden, actually it seems like there are more this year.
Which is good.
I think, it does seem to me that there are more bees, and maybe I'm just more conscious of it and noticing it.
And you have a website for...
One of the websites is pollinator.org. That is a link to many other efforts to provide information for the public. And the Pollinator Partnership that is linked to that website has eco-regional guides for what's the most effective thing to plant. But I think what you're seeing in terms of your own garden is the result of a lot of individual efforts to plant coneflowers, as you were mentioning, Gary. Plant things that birds and other pollinators will in fact benefit from, and it only takes a small amount. One estimate has been that if 2% of a farm were placed in flowering plants specifically aimed at a broad range of pollinators, there'd be a 5-fold increase documented in the number of pollinators in that same area in that whole farm.
I would also add, Barry, that there are plants like, as we were talking earlier, the coneflower, the butterfly bush, Russian sage, that are very deer resistant. So for those who live in suburbs and are visited every night by deer in the neighborhood, they generally stay away from those flowers, keeping them fresh for the butterflies and the bees.
Selectivity.
Absolutely.
And I know in my, it's a bunch of rosemary plants that I have now, and that's, the bees love them. It's really interesting.
Well, and the monarch butterfly specifically is in great decline, and just planting certain types of milkweed has a major enhancement as far as both nectar and pollen sources for that important butterfly.
Okay, well then I think that's the last word. Okay. We've run out of time, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining me this week, and thank you for joining all of us this week's edition of Montgomery Weekend Review. I'm Mariana Cordier. Please join us next week at this same time. Thank you.